What is going on, everyone, and welcome to the Bot Podcast, where we interview movers, shakers, and innovators and talk all things conversational user interfaces. I'm your host, Chad Oda, and today we have a very special guest, Andy Hahn. Andy Hahn is the founder of madskills.io, and madskills.io, their goal is to empower businesses with voice, chat, and AI. Previously, Andy had exited a Techstars accelerator through Amazon with this company called Twine. He's also held management positions previously at companies such as Mobile Day and McKesson. So at that, Andy, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks. Nice to be here.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So before we jump into more of the conversational specific questions, I always like to ask sort of a unique question based upon our guests' sort of background. Is it's always sort of interesting to see so many different backgrounds that have entered the sort of chatbot and voice space. And I was actually looking at what you actually went to school for. So you actually went to school for physics engineering, and you've ended up in something that seems to be maybe somewhat unrelated. So I'm curious, how that sort of came to be. So how did you get from physics to voice and chat today?
A long winding road, I guess.
Fair enough.
As a student, I was working as a research assistant in a high energy physics laboratory. And we were doing mostly simulation of colliders. And so that's where I started learning to program. So my introduction was physicist code in Perl to programming. And the more I got into it, the more it resonated with me than physics. And so kind of changed directions coming out of school and went into a technical programming career. And that led through all sorts of enterprise software and startups, and eventually through Twine started doing Alexa and voice stuff, and thought it was just absolutely amazing. And we went through the Alexa accelerator, and then came out the other end with a ton of ideas that I had to do myself. So here I am.
Awesome. So you came out of it must have been 2017 cohort of the Alexa accelerator with Techstars?
Yep, the first one.
Yeah, the first one. So talk to me a little bit about, what Twine is. And, I know that Twine was actually acquired. So that's really cool that you've had the exit in the space. So maybe give our listeners a bit of an idea of what Twine was and what you guys were building when you were in that Techstars accelerator.
Sure. We were taking conversational UI and voice into the workplace, right? And we at Twine, our hypothesis was that the best place to start was in the conference room. Part of that came from coming out of Mobile Day. So we acquired the assets for Mobile Day to start Twine, which is a conference call dialing app. So we were already neck deep in that space, and decided we were going to try and do the same thing for the conference room. Ended up doing a lot of customer research, and found out that a control plane based on conversational UI was probably the best way to go for what we were trying to accomplish. And so we had a whole in-room system that you could control through Slack to book rooms, to start your meetings, to share a document on the media in the room, and control your presentations. We even had a feature we called lurkers and squatters that would kick people out of rooms or find you a new one if it was the CEO squatting in your room. And then around Christmas or so in 2016, I got an Echo for Christmas. And I've heard a lot of stories that start like this, right? And I was like, it'd be so cool if we could control everything in the conference room with the Echo. And so I threw together a quick skill, and that ended up taking us into the Techstars accelerator, and kind of wasn't really a pivot, but an addition to the conversational UI of Twine. And so had a product that I was really proud of at that point, and I ended up selling it to CarrierX in the long run.
Cool. And that's actually where you are the VP of R&D today, right, at CarrierX?
Yeah. So CarrierX does conferencing. Freeconferencecall.com is probably their flagship product. And so they have a similar setup, and wanted to bring in the Twine technology and other things that we owned into what they offer. So here we are.
Cool. Yeah. And just, I guess, for the viewer's sake, you work at CarrierX. Your sort of side company is called madskills.io, where you sort of build these conversational interfaces. And the company that you had recently exited, provided CarrierX was Twine. So just to sort of frame it a little bit. But I think the really cool thing, a little bit, but I think the cool thing, Andy, is the fact that you were essentially doing like multimodality stuff, between Slack and, Amazon Alexa integration, before really people were talking about sort of multimodality really. So I remember if from our previous conversation, I think you had like a one-touch, conference that could get initiated from that. Remind me again, like how that sort of interacted with Alexa.
So the voice functionality we built out for Twine was the ability to walk into the conference room and say, start my meeting or start my presentation, right? And it would look at the calendar for the room and fire up the video conference for you, or start an ad hoc one. And then if you'd attached like a PowerPoint or something to the meeting, it could throw your presentation up on the screen, and you could say page up, page down, and navigate your presentation while you were in the conference room without ever having to pull out your phone or open a laptop or whatever, right? So really trying to remove that horrible friction that I think probably everybody's experienced trying to actually start a video conference or even a teleconference in a meeting room.
Yeah, totally. Well, that was like me for the past 5 minutes before he jumped on this call. I was like, I got to get the microphone right, and we got to make sure the teleconference is working. So yeah, no, I totally see that market need. And that was actually going to be my next question, but you answered it. So, between all of these different things you're working on, you actually have started a new company, which is trying to sort of address sort of the front desk opportunity and bring some automation through voice in there. So can you sort of speak to what front desk is and, what the opportunity you guys are trying to solve with is?
Yeah. So front desk is, at this point, it's a really simple visitor management system.
Yeah.
I started Mad Skills, and front desk is the first product I'm working on, to really explore, the power of conversational UI and voice in the workplace. Right. And because I think it's going to be huge at some point, but the market isn't really catching up as fast as consumer. So, set it up so that it would have staying power and be able to explore different avenues. So anyway, front desk is a really simple visitor management system where you can, arrive at a company and say, Alexa, ask front desk to check me in, have a simple conversation, and it will then notify the person you're there to see in Slack, and they have some very simple functionality to manage their visitors through a chat interface in Slack. I'm really hoping that we're able to take the voice functionality and kind of grow it to also support in-office visitor management instead of just the check-in process, and really enrich the workplace that way with front desk. And then, of course, there's all sorts of dreams about all the other things that administrative tasks you could ask something like that to do, like ask front desk to send me information on, the deal with Amazon or something like that. And it knows the information, it knows your email address, and it's able to put that all together and figure out if you can view it, and then sends it to you via email or something. So, all sorts of incredible functionality that we could actually enable via voice or conversation in the workplace, but starting really simple and small at this point, and just working with customers to see what it is they actually need instead of just geeking out and coding.
No, yeah. So I was actually going to say that was like sort of the common thread that I saw that you had. You've been taking like a very pragmatic approach throughout all of this, right? There's the tendency to be prone towards, just being so excited about the technology, as you say. But yeah, it seems to me that there's like a common thread of, hey, let's sort of look at the problems that already exist today that just people hate, like teleconferencing or like checking in, and, you got to use the LCD screen and like type your name and go through all these steps, as an issue. So yeah, I think that's really what the ecosystem needs more of at this point, just more pragmatism around either, addressing developer needs or addressing sort of simple needs from the consumer side of things. So I think it's really cool that you're taking that path. That being said, as you've sort of gone through these different startups, from Twine and the accelerator, to some of the projects you're working on today, what have you sort of seen change across that ecosystem and landscape? Have you seen things evolve and some of the obstacles get addressed, or are we still sort of seeing sort of the same things from your opinion?
So yes, things are changing, but it's very, very slow, right? So if you look back to end of 2017, Amazon released Alexa for Business, which Twine was kind of part of, and they had some parallel functionality, and they made a big push then. But really, user adoption has been incredibly slow, right? It just seems like such a simple use case, but it's just not rolling out. And I think it's taking a lot longer to just be accepted and not kind of have the giggle factor around it in the office, right? And surprisingly, from what I've heard, security isn't the biggest concern about it, right? People aren't worried that Amazon's just listening to their business ideas. They're, they're just, well, is it going to work well enough for my business? Is it worth, making this complete shift? Will people know how to use it? Those are the kinds of questions that I hear, much less than security-oriented things.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's changing, but at a way slower pace than the consumer voice market. But if you look back at smartphones, right, that kind of adoption curve, it was pretty well mapped out there too, where it just blew up in the consumer space, and then enterprise or workplace use of smart devices kind of lagged behind for many years, and is maybe now just reaching saturation.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I totally agree with that sentiment, right? It was just like you get promised this new technology revolution, what actually comes out is maybe a little disappointing, and then some pragmatism sets in and we start to get some really value-driven experiences. But I still, we haven't really seen the Uber or the Airbnb of this sort of technology revolution yet. So it's hopefully definitely something that will like crest the horizon soon, but yet to be seen for sure. So maybe to dig a bit deeper, what are some of the specific obstacles that you think still needs to maybe get resolved, specifically for voice, before we can sort of maybe get to that next phase?
Well, I mean, the first obstacle is just acceptance, right? And have people, my generation especially, growing up with keyboards, but voice being fanciful and never really, attempts were made again and again for dictation and whatever, and it was just all terrible. So the expectation that it's just going to work and it's going to be available isn't there yet, and so that's taking time to progress. But then the technology, some things are very, very simple and very easy to do today and would work very well. But the technology for other things that seem very simple just isn't there yet. Front desk is a really good example. Actually recognizing the names that you give it for who you're there to see and who you are is really difficult, right? Getting those right and getting those matched up is not something that Alexa does for you without a lot of work on the back end. And so, some of the mishaps are actually pretty funny when you look at what front desk does. But so the technology kind of needs to catch up. People need to just expect this kind of ubiquitous computing to be available in an environment. I think that's happening, and I think it's happening at an appropriate pace. And the improvements in technology are coming. I mean, Amazon just announced a 20% reduction in error rates, just as I was actually working on voice model updates for front desk. And it was pretty impressive what that did, right? That made my life a lot easier and a lot simpler, and potentially makes the product a lot better. So it's getting there. As far as, I mean, there's other things that will have to be addressed. Security is a big one. Identity is another one that's going to have to be addressed. Was told in 2017 in the accelerator that, those things are coming, at least for Alexa, but they're not going to come fast. They're going to really wait to mature and be released very slowly. They just announced the HIPAA compliance skills, which is really amazing, right? That they've gotten that far. But then there's things like Google Home that it turns out, anyone can see all the details about the device on the network, and that's just not going to work in a in an enterprise environment, right? So, yeah, lots of angles to it that just kind of have to come along, but I think it's going to get there.
Yeah, fingers crossed. Fingers crossed. Otherwise, you and I wouldn't be in the trenches in this space. But
right?
totally. So I actually want to go back to Twine a little bit and sort of dive, a little deep into that, because, I think most people entering this space right now, it's like whether they're at the startup space or maybe they're a bit more mature as a startup and they're maybe looking, at a point where they're looking to exit. So what was the experience for you building that company up and, sort of figuring out how to make an exit actually, because I think there's probably quite a few startups in the space right now that are trying to really figure out, what's the trajectory for them, whether that be an exit or, whether that be sort of just soldiering on.
I mean, I'll be blunt. The exit wasn't spectacular for Twine, right? We were able to make it happen because we had really long-term relationships with CarrierX, stretching way back into Mobile Day, and had worked with the company, knew the people really well, knew what they were trying to accomplish, and it was really more of a serendipitous alignment. That exit took a long time and a lot of work, potentially more than it should have. But I don't think I can give any sort of strategy that anyone would want to remotely try and adopt, right? But as what I have noticed is that as time goes by, these technologies and the things that are being built with them early are being more and more accepted and even expected, and even kind of old guard company cultures like CarrierX are starting to go, we've done voice for decades, but in telecom, right? And these new pathways where it's backed by computing instead of just other people on the other end are going to be really important. And so they're starting to think about how they can acquire talent or acquire technology.
Yeah, no, you make a really good point. I think this technology, has the opportunity of being just so pervasive and just so ubiquitous. And, we're sort of standing at the edge before I think the inflection point happens. I was reading something earlier today. This company that started doing like online stamps has now sort of migrated to being voice first, and having
Really?
a lot of voice first offerings. I think it was Pitney Boys or
Pitney
something.
Bowes? Okay.
Pitney Bowes, yeah. If I remember correctly, the history was sort of doing online stamps, and now I know they're pushing really big and really hard into this space with the voice. So I think it's just so interesting to start to look at a lot of these transformational technologies, and then I think the industry is sort of beginning to turn. That ship is turning, and it's like, oh crap, okay, let's start sort of figuring out who we need from a resourcing perspective. So actually, from your opinion, what was that experience like as far as trying to find like developers or people that were like maybe voice user interface designers? Like, was that a difficult task to find those people, or is it sort of becoming more easy as time goes on here?
As far as GUI design, I don't know. I've never even attempted to try and find somebody in that space.
Yeah.
But as someone who runs technical teams, right? I've never looked for technology specific. I've looked for passion and ability, and just the drive to learn something new is going to get you way farther than somebody who's built a ton of skills. If you need that expertise immediately, then contract it. Don't try and hire for it.
That's actually really good advice. Yeah, totally. So that being said, like for someone that is, maybe a developer and they're sort of seeing voice and chatbots, like what would be some advice that you would give them to, maybe start looking into the space or getting involved?
I mean, it's really just that, get involved, right? It's so easy to create an Alexa skill. You can throw together a blueprint just to see what the interactions feel like, right? Or you can throw some code out there, and Alexa now will host your skill for you, right, on the platform. So you just paste the code into the browser and hit go, and you can play around with it. So it's so easy to get started there. Chatbots may be a little bit more of a learning curve. There's certainly lots of GUI platforms, as you well know, that allow you to build things that way. But I found the technical side a little bit harder to actually get into, to write code on chatbots. But it's not, the barrier entry isn't huge. It's way different than it was 10 years ago, where you're going, okay, how can I run a server in my bedroom and get a dedicated IP address, and right? You just put this stuff in the cloud and it just runs. It's amazing. So yeah, just roll up your sleeves and get involved. And then there's a lot of community around it too, right? There's your meetup, obviously, and there's a lot of other places to congregate. The Voice First community on Twitter is amazing. You can get a lot of input and experience there. So yeah, come join us.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, that's so funny, because we actually had met at, one of the first meetups that I ever did too. And, it was like several months later that we end up, working together on some cool projects. But yeah, it's, the community is actually really great, right? I think, the people are really willing and they want to share, thoughts and insights that they're having. So, I think it's just a really good time, especially from like a development perspective, from your point, right? I think the barrier to entry, to building like a skill or building a chatbot on some of these frameworks and platforms is quite accessible. That being said, sort of like moving beyond, starting point, and sort of like looking into maybe like the next year, like what do you see sort of occurring as far as your predictions in 2019? Because, I think from what I've seen through your previous projects and some of the stuff we're working on, you seem to have a very fundamental belief, and correct me if I'm wrong, that it's not going to be voice first, always, or chatbot always, or website always, but those are touch points on sort of a customer experience. But that's just my observation from seeing how you.
No, I fully believe that people are going to want to interact with things where they want to interact with things. And I think voice first gets a bad rap as being voice only.
Yeah.
But it's really more of a mentality of designing for the conversation first, right? For the interaction you want to have with your user, and then taking them to the platforms where they need to go, obviously with voice being a big component of that. And I absolutely think that voice is going to be a huge driver in many different ways. I think we're going to start to see a lot of the voice search stuff start to have impact, maybe through the next year, maybe not until somewhere into 2020, where it's going to start to click with people that businesses are being discovered, products are being discovered in a whole new search paradigm, and then it's going to be important. From what I'm seeing, I think we're going to start to see, the advancement of voice first B2B SaaS kind of products. Obviously, Front Desk will be the first one, and it'll be but just the feedback I'm getting from from customers as as I work with individuals and try and figure out what's going on. It's just becoming more and more open and accepting of those ideas. So I think those are going to start to come out. You'll probably see, a SaaS product actually start to become reasonable that has a large voice component. And then I'm not the expert, but voice shopping seems to have a lot of momentum behind it too. And it seems like we'll start to see some success stories there as well.
Yeah, no, definitely. So, I mean, maybe springboarding off what you were talking about with shopping, what are your thoughts on like multimodality? Because I know some people are, some people only want to use voice, some people say chatbots are the way, but, I think, you sort of believe in multimodality. Like, what are your thoughts around that?
I mean, at some point, the need for multimodality goes away for basic commodities, right? So I need more light bulbs. Alexa, order me light bulbs. You need to know what they fit and kind of the basics, but you don't need more than that. So yeah, multimodality, not so important probably for commodities and that sort of thing, especially as the AI becomes better at understanding your wants and needs. But I'm never going to say, Alexa, order me some shoes and just be satisfied with what shows up. Even me, the completely unfascist conscious person, right? That just wouldn't work. And so then you're going to need more, right? You're going to need some sort of multimodal experience. Can be completely voice driven. I mean, if you look at Brian Romley's stuff from the 80s, right? He's got a whole, voice first video screen shopping experience that the people in the videos go through. And I don't know that it'll be that kind of immersive theater shopping experience, but just watching people interact with their smartphones now using voice to do control there. I'm sure the small screen or even a larger screen in the home will play a big role as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. You make a good point. It's like in certain respects, a lot of the ideas around voice and chatbots and multimodality, didn't just like spring up, a couple of years ago, to your point, right? People from like the 1960s and 70s and 80s were working on natural language processing and different algorithms. And, you look at Star Trek, and how they interact with voice and with visuals. And, it's interesting to sort of see how all of this sort of culminates and it finally reaches a point of, convergence. And now we get to experience some of these cool things today, so that must, I always think it's interesting from the perspective of people that were sort of around, during that era to sort of see, oh, that wasn't possible like 30, 40 odd years ago. And now it's finally coming to fruition. So it must be sort of interesting perspective.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot that's just in the last few years that has become possible. And I think we're at standing on the edge of the precipice or whatever the analogy is, but jumping on the Star Trek bandwagon. One of my favorite things from Star Trek was they go back in time and Scotty picks up a mouse at a computer and tries to talk to it. And I just can't wait till we make that shift.
Yeah.
Right? That's the expectation, that you talk to technology and it just responds. And I think we're finally being able to see that in the future.
Yeah, no. And I think from the opposite end of the spectrum, I think there's going to be, or there is generations now of kids that are just going to grow up not knowing the notion of, hey, I can't talk to this computer, right? It's mind boggling, right?
My kids ask their iPads to do the most crazy things. And there's no way that'll work. And then it works. And I'm like, wow, I need to make sure I check what they're doing a little closer.
It's like a $500 bill on Andy's credit card. Oops.
Yeah, the first thing I did when we got Alexa was disable voice purchasing.
Smart. Yeah, that's actually a really good point, because I know you were just talking about sort of like identity sort of authentication, and that seems to be an area that, there's a lot of talk around, there's a lot of interesting projects, but I personally haven't seen anything. I know Amazon Alexa has some capabilities around that, but I haven't personally explored it very much, but seems to be a pressing topic for sure.
Alexa can definitely recognize an individual's voice with only a little training. They have it behind a pretty obtuse configuration wall to set it up. And to make sure you identify yourself and provide context around the identity they're deriving from your voice. But I think that's going to grow, and at some point it may grow such that your identity is known not just on your own devices, right, but across the network somehow. And there's some way to key in on your voice or other features that are going to allow you to provide identity that way. And that gets really exciting and really scary all at the same time, right? But it's going to be amazing to see what we're able to do, and hopefully we'll make some good decisions along the way, and won't turn it into just an absolute nightmare, right?
Yeah, fingers crossed on people having some ethics around some of this stuff, because it's crazy. You see some of this technology on some of the research side of things where they can like emulate people's voices. I saw this company out of, I think it was the UK, that they could emulate like Obama's voice and type things in there. Then there's like deep fakes, so you can mirror it against the video. So yeah. It's totally.
Probably Lyrebirds, the company you're talking about.
That's the one.
I've always wanted to make a Christopher Walken Alexa skill using Lyrebird, but obviously there's so much licensing there that I'd never be able to.
Totally. Well, yeah, that's actually an interesting segue, because I was talking to someone that does like voice branding, and she was telling me that she was getting concerned that hey, computers are going to take, my career away because I do a lot of voice stuff for different companies and stuff like that. From your perspective, do you see a lot of those, actual voice recordings, not like sort of the Alexa, dictating things through her own voice, but do you see brands beginning to use actual, people talking, humans talking on their skills? And do you think that's going to become a thing for brands to sort of brand themselves?
I don't know. I question that, right? Because it's a very personal experience with Alexa right now, and there's a lot of expectation on how that's going to go. And when you open a skill and it's Fast Eddie the car salesman talking to you, that's a really jarring transition, right? That's a joke, of course, but you can see that it's going to be hard to find the middle ground and find your sonic brand that isn't completely disruptive on a platform where people have real expectations of the interaction paradigms. I can't say that I'm an expert on what brands are doing in this field at all, but in my interactions as a consumer, I haven't really seen it at all.
Yeah.
There's been some audio that gets inserted, sound, but not voice. And that's been used for branding. And I think that's probably pretty effective on these platforms at this point. But then there's other platforms, other things where, the person's voice really is strongly tied to the brand, like a podcaster, right? And that might be what you would expect in that case. So it'll be really interesting to see how it shakes out and what works and what doesn't. But I'm losing the word. I'll have some skepticism about anybody just trying to shove their own voice into one of these platforms where the voice personality is so well known.
Yeah, totally. No, that's actually a really good point. I think maybe to segue from that is, it seems to me that we're still at this phase where we're trying to figure out what's the correct content format to actually keep people engaged. And I feel like a lot of the testing going on right now, as far as I can tell, is how do people even want to engage, and what type of content will they best engage with? I was talking to Milkana over there at Jargon, and their platform sort of helps to make that content more accessible and organized. And then, I talked to Andrew Daniel Whaley at BBC, and they're trying to experiment with a lot of different types of content. From your opinion, like, have you seen like any one Alexa skill or type of content configuration that you think is like, really doing a good job? Or
obviously the NPR skill that,
yeah,
the top Alexa skill, right? Everyone loves that. And they've done a really good job of blending their brand into something like that. But they've always been, a voice medium. And so I think that's quite expected. Some of the other ones, it's really, really more about getting out of your own way than it is about, at this point, I think, than it is about, trying to deliver the right content. But, I'm an engineer and pragmatic and, and very, I don't know, black and white in my, desire for interactions. And so probably not the best person to really take a deep look into what kind of content is working and what isn't. I tend to build, voice conversations and simple interaction command type stuff for a lot of the things that I'm doing, and not really providing content. That's kind of where I'm looking to people like you to see what the future holds and what's possible there. So.
no, that's actually a really good point, because there seems to be like this like sort of silos of experiences that we're beginning to see on voice, right? To your point, something like front desk is like sort of like this task driven experience where it's just like, okay, well, we have this goal and we're going to walk you down these successive steps and provide that end user value. And then there seems to be like also, historical sort of like entertainment brands that are now sort of taking that content and trying to adapt it to new mediums. And then there's like this whole other silo, which is like trying to create like voice first, like native experiences that haven't been done before. So I think it's really interesting to sort of see all those sort of different, types of skills evolving over time. And also, looking at the ambient noises skill and it being the top one in the marketplace, I think says something about where we're at today. So,
yeah, and just to kind of follow on that, I think that it's going to be likely that the right content is not going to be the same for everybody, and that being able to have some context or understanding of personality of who you're interacting with, and being able to supply content that's appropriate for that is also going to be very important, right? Some people will just like bullet lists, some people like paragraphs, right? So.
Yeah, no, it seems to be quite like a pertinent topic at hand these days, is like sort of the context management with the dialogue. And it seems like, whether it's on a chatbot or whether it's on voice, right, we can deliver, very, sort of deterministic, these like finite state machines where there's like only a set number of options, right. But, the whole, promise of conversations is the fact that is conversational, like truly conversational, right? Where it's not just like a single turn interaction. So, what's your like thoughts, on current sort of context management technology? I know Alexa definitely has some stuff baked into it, and, what do you think about it?
One of the themes running through pretty much everything that I've worked on, after I joined the computer industry, software industry, has been, how do you bring context together to provide more value, right? And so I've been thinking for a long time about all the context that's out there that could actually be easily tied together to drive real value. And that's where, things like Twine came from, where we got information about you from Slack, we got it from your calendar, we got it from a couple other sources, and we're able to bring in really powerful experiences, simple but powerful experiences based on that. And then you look at the context management, where it's just simple context within that session, not even a larger interaction, right? But just that single portion of the conversation that's available on these platforms. And it feels very rudimentary, right? It's a big step forward, maybe from having nothing, but there's so much more that we're going to be able to do at some point down the road where, where you can tie so much information about somebody together and be able to provide real rich experiences. I can't wait till some of those start becoming available as platforms or on some of the large platforms.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more with that, right? There seems to be just like this, excess of third-party data that's out there. And, I think there's certainly like an ethical and sort of moral debate surrounding it, especially,
Yeah, for sure.
provided Cambridge Analytics. I remember I was reading some study and they said they had, I think it was like more than 100 data points, and they could accurately predict certain things about the person that their spouse couldn't even accurately predict. So I think there's probably a fine line between, something that's like too invasive versus the curation people want, or maybe there's just some sort of control aspect that needs to be.
I think we need to be careful about predicting things that and doing things on people's behalf that they don't want.
Yeah.
Right. And then right now, like you're referring to, the uncanny valley where oh my God, how did the system do that for me? And it just creeps people out, right? My favorite story is the one where Target figured out the teenager was pregnant and started sending ads to the house. And, found out that was a really bad customer.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think the uncanny valley will change. Right?
Yeah.
I think its definition and its scope will change as these technologies progress and our expectations of them progress. But then there's also the ethical side, right? You don't want you don't want the skill to order you a puppy, without lots of confirmation or other much more invasive things in your life, right? So, yeah.
Yeah, no, I agree. Probably not good to order like 10 puppies to someone's house. That might not be good. But that being said, for you, like, where do you see this technology going? Right, voice specifically. What's your vision? Let's say like 5 years in the future. It could be as specific or as broad as your opinion is. But just curious to hear that.
I really, really hope, and at this point somewhat believe, that the access to computing via voice will become much more ubiquitous, right? We'll be able to do things in our cars that will have context. We'll be able to do things in our homes, that share context and are able to, provide us really rich experiences that way. And across the board, right? That it'll just become a lot more pervasive, and we'll start seeing a lot of the mundane and tiresome tasks that we all perform, perhaps without even thinking at this point, just become a lot simpler, and that there will start to, be real value provided by a lot of these different interactions. I'm hoping that plays out in such a way that it's not just, the two superpowers or whatever that control all of that, and that, that others are providing real value to the platforms as well. But we also might get to the point where, and there's a lot of work going into this, where everything Alexa can do is encoded on a chip. And so, it's super simple to build your own device that has its own AI right built into it, and so the paradigm might shift to, your individual assistant as opposed to something in the cloud. I think that's more in the 10-year spectrum than 5. But yeah, anyway, I kind of rambled on there. I guess kind of a broad vision of really being able to expect this technology to be able to help you in many different contexts, and do definitely do the simple things, and start taking care of some of the other more complicated but real draining tasks. Right?
Yeah, totally. It's actually a really, to me anyways, a very similar viewpoint, because I was actually reading this book from the 1980s, I believe. Someone from MIT wrote a book about artificial intelligence, and they were sort of breaking down like all of the successive components that we need to have some sort of definition of AI, which I think we sort of illustrate in movies and in books. And to your point, I really agree with the fact that we're going to get to a place where there's ambient computing, or this AGI, or however you want to say it, that makes computing just very accessible and ubiquitous. No matter if you walk into a hotel or you walk into a house, it's going to be there. And I think, to me, that's what's really exciting about this space. It's like we're building the building blocks of the future. But yeah, it's definitely, we're in for a wild ride, and it seems that we're only at the start. So, but yeah, so at this point, Andy, I just want to give you the floor. If you want to share anything about Front Desk, or anything that you're doing at Mad Skills that you want people to know about, or where people can learn more about some of the stuff you're doing, definitely let the audience know.
Sure. Yeah. Like I said, Mad Skills Front Desk is still really simple, and working with people to figure out what the real wins are for it, and how to build out a voice first visitor management system. So by all means, if you're interested or know somebody that's interested, come check it out at tryfrontdesk.co, and just kick the tires and see what it's like. It's all free right now. It's in a free beta, and there's always going to be a free tier for it. With the way cloud computing is now, there's no reason not to offer a simple free tier for people. That's kind of one of my technical soapboxes there, but
that's a good perspective. I don't think we hear enough, right? That's so true too.
It's so easy and so inexpensive to run that sort of simple service that why shouldn't you? Amazon gives away so much for free on AWS.
Yeah.
Pass it on, right? Pay it forward.
Totally.
But yeah, if you want to check out Front Desk, please give it a try. I'm on Twitter at @Hahn. Not terribly active, but share a few things there from time to time. And I guess that's me.
Sweet. Before I let you go, Andy, a question I ask all my guests. I think the prospect of just sort of like venturing into the unknown, and just getting up every day and just continuing to explore, I really think is compelling for most people. So for you, what keeps you motivated? Like what creates that drive for you to do what you're doing?
Really excitement about a vision for the future where things really reach their potential that they have. But there also, I found it really important to build a community around the things that I want to do, and have people that are interested in the same things, and on parallel tracks to keep me going. So it's really both a vision and a community thing for me. And without one or the other of those, it always falters. So.
Absolutely. Also, humor is a must, Andy. Right.
I get chided for that sometimes, for making bad dad jokes, but yeah, that's part of me.
Cool. Well, Andy, I appreciate you being on the podcast. We'll definitely have you back soon, and look forward to seeing what cool stuff you cook up next.
All right. Thanks, Chad.
Cool. Take it easy.